There are times when I think, first off, the existence of the internet, as far as I'm concerned, is the greatest love-hate relationship of all time. The worst days, the internet was the biggest mistake in the history of mankind, as far as I'm concerned. But on the best days...
Sometimes it brings poetic justice, that's for sure.
On the best days, the internet is one of the greatest things. This is GameStop story. Surely you all know what we're talking about. The idea that a bunch of autistic Redditors can organize a movement to buy GameStop stock and cause the value to skyrocket. And the reaction you got from these Wall Street types, these hedge fund types. There was this goofy-looking dude on Fox News, I think Fox Business, and he was fuming, like, ban these people. We gotta have regulations to ban these people from doing this ever again. But in all seriousness, this is a very, very big deal. Certainly, you can obviously, you can only manipulate the stock market for a certain amount of time before a bubble eventually bursts. But this also certainly does have implications, just the socio-political aspects of it, that, as you were saying, Jacob, these hedge fund types, and technically you can make all the jokes about Wall Street, Wolf of Wall Street, whatever, that these people have been artificially manipulating prices and stocks for years. That's literally what they do for a living. But then as soon as a bunch of gamers in their basement do the same thing as a joke started on Reddit, they lose their minds and demand laws be passed immediately.
Yep. Now all of a sudden they're pro-regulation. Now they want as much government regulation as they possibly can to get these little punks in line. And what I noticed about it, what I knew what was going to happen whenever this started, whenever I first heard about this story, I knew that they were going to somehow find a way to put a stop to this. Because here's the thing, you can't elect someone without having to fight these people. And when I say these people, I mean the hedge fund managers, the billionaires who pour. I mean, you think about how much money they poured into the 2020 election, even the 2016 election, to stop Donald Trump. They outspent Trump like 5-1 whenever you add in all of the super PACs. So you almost can't win elections without these people's permission. You can't really, if you're a public figure, you can't hold an opinion without these people's permission, because they will send the mob after you and cancel you. So when this started happening and I saw that the market was starting to go down, I knew they were going to find some way to put a stop to this. I didn't think it'd be this open. I was thinking, okay, they'll somehow get the SEC to step in. They'll find some kind of technicality. But no, the brokerage companies just cut it off. Like they just turned the switch off, said you can't trade. Like Robinhood said you can sell, but you can't buy. They did that for about a good 12 hours, I think, more than 12 hours. So after you've bought this stock, the price is going to go down. You can't buy any more stock, but you can sell it. So you can sell it to the billionaire. Not only do the hedge fund managers get to cover their short, but you can sell them the stock, but you can't buy anymore. So they're literally stealing. Robinhood was actually stealing money from their customers. And somebody pointed this out, that the reason they can do that is because the people with the accounts on Robinhood, they're not the actual customers. They are the product. So Robinhood makes their money by selling their information to the hedge funds. The hedge funds are the actual customers of Robinhood, which is why they're able to stop their product from continuing to buy more shares. So I didn't get involved. I didn't buy any stock I didn't buy any GameStop stock. But I can imagine I can understand the frustration that people felt. And this really opened up a lot of pent-up frustration, a lot of pent-up anger. You got to remember, millennials came of age at a time that was very similar to the Great Depression. I mean, you think about people who were kids in the 1920s. They came of age in 1929, 1930, 1931. They're thinking, okay, I'm going to go start a business. I'm going to move to town, get a good paying job. And the Great Depression comes through and just devastates the economy. This was a very similar storyline to what millennials faced whenever the Great Recession hit in 2008. So a lot of millennials are still very, very pissed off at Wall Street for what they did during the Great Recession. And, this GameStop stuff, it's really starting to let out, it's really starting to show that a lot of that anger has never been appeased. And it's going to take a lot of hedge fund managers losing a lot of money before that anger gets appeased. And I think this is awesome. I think it's great.
Yeah, and I think actually Nigel Farage addressed this and referred to this whole movement, this GameStop rebellion, as the spiritual successor to the Brexit and Donald Trump movements. And it certainly has been compared to the MAGA movement in a lot of ways. Certainly the populist tones, like the regular guys, the little guys, average Joes living in their parents' basement, gamers rising up and humiliating Wall Street, humiliating some of the wealthiest and most powerful people on the planet, which is certainly, again, that is an appealing aspect. New York Times has a really interesting piece kind of talking about the origins of this with a YouTuber, a social media user who goes by the online alias of Roaring Kitty. His real name is Keith Gill. He's 34 years old, apparently a former financial educator for an insurance firm in his home state of Massachusetts. He's apparently first started kind of talking about these kinds of tactics back in 2019. And at the height of this with GameStop, he, according to the byline of the New York Times, his $53,000 investment in the company briefly reached $48 million in value. So there's some people, I think the New York Times piece kind of is maybe painting this guy as kind of the ringleader. Now, whether or not that's purely for informative purposes or perhaps kind of nudging their buddies on Wall Street to say, hey, if you guys want to scalp if you want to head on a silver platter, this guy might be a prime candidate number one. I don't know. But this reinforces that this was totally organic. This is the kind of stuff I usually wouldn't expect it from Reddit. Again, this came from Reddit, the subreddit r/Wall Street Bets, which I think has become probably the second prominent subreddit to be banned. First they banned the Donald, the pro-Trump subreddit page, and then they briefly banned r Wall Street Bets. They eventually created a new one, r Wall Street Bets New, before they unlocked, restored access to r Wall Street Bets, the original. But this is how organic this is really another big aspect of the story.
This isn't supposed to happen. Here's how 2021 was supposed to play out. Now we've finally got Democrats in power. Joe Biden is president. We finally got a minority as vice president. So now we've got representation, and we've got the first woman. We got the first female Secretary of the Treasury. By the way, that's what Jen Psaki pointed out when they first asked her about what was going on. Her response was, "Oh, we have the first female. We have the first woman who's the Treasury Secretary," as if. Who cares? This doesn't have, but anyway,
we have our first black Secretary of Defense now.
Right. So they've got the representation. It's like, okay, that'll keep minorities happy, so they'll stop pitching a fit. And they're finally figuring, okay, we've got kind of a left of center government that'll keep the millennials happy, who are still struggling financially. And then this happens. This really throws a monkey wrench in their plans because they want 2021 to play out smoothly. They want the Biden administration to be able to send out checks, to be able to send out stimulus and help people. People will be happy with what they have. They'll be happy with the crumbs they're being thrown. And they'll move into sort of like an FDR. We'll finally move into a Democratic majority FDR era where for the next 12 years we'll have Democratic administrations who will move us away from populism. So this really, really messes up their plan because, look, the average millennial Democrat does not think like the average Democrat in power. The Biden administration is slam full of people who have worked on Wall Street. It's slam full of people who have been corporate shills their entire life. And a perfect example. Now, she is not a Biden administration official, but this is kind of some of the thinking that goes behind the people who look at the Redditors as basically just a bunch of peasants who don't know what they're doing. Some of them want to use carrots. Others want to use sticks. Laura Unger is one of them that wants to use a stick. So she went on CNBC and said this.
So the SEC does have the authority to suspend trading if it thinks that the market is being manipulated. The unfortunate thing about that is then it almost guarantees that people holding that GameStop stock would lose money.
No kidding. Like, really, they would lose money if the SEC stopped in and stopped them from trading. And see, this is what I expected to happen when this started. I figured the Biden SEC is going to jump in because whenever they were asking Psaki about this and they were asking the Biden administration about what their reaction to it was, instead of coming out and basically saying, well, hey, look, these Redditors, the little people are now playing by the same rules that these hedge fund managers have been playing at for decades. Instead of giving the populist leftists what most leftists think, instead of giving that response, they just said, we're monitoring the situation. That was their continual response. We're monitoring the situation. And, no kidding. If the SEC stepped in, the Redditors would lose money, wouldn't they?
Because it will impact the market price. But that's something that the SEC could certainly do, and they could sort of suspend trading and sort things out and find out who's saying what, whether there's a correlation to trading, whether there is a concerted effort to manipulate the market, or whether this is just a stock that people are really excited about.
Well, it was a little bit of a mix. I mean, there were some people who genuinely do care about GameStop, just like the meme. They do.
It's a nostalgic company. I mean, especially for gamers. Yeah.
Yeah. For a lot of gamers, that was the reason. But most people that were getting in this, they didn't even care if they made any money. In fact, they were willing to lose hundreds of dollars if it meant that these billionaires were going to lose billions. If it meant that they could stick it to these hedge fund managers, they were more than happy to throw away a couple of $100s. So she's talking about, the SEC needs to step in and see if they're actually interested in GameStop or if they're just doing this to manipulate the market. And this is what I knew was going to end up being a problem. The Biden administration doesn't need market volatility. They need the market to be stable. They need a stable currency. They need a stable market. So that way the news media can show that we've got the chaotic Trump administration out of the way. Now we finally got calm in the markets. Everything is peaceful. Everyone's calm. Just lull everyone to sleep. No. But now these Redditors come on. They're, like I said, they're really messing the game up for them.
I was just going to say, doesn't what make this harder that it's all happening on social media? I mean, how do you define market manipulation when you're talking about the internet and social media and blogs?
Well, if people actually are saying, let's all buy 1,000 shares now to drive up the price, I would say that sounds like market manipulation to me. Whether they're really doing it, who's the person that's saying it, what's their interest in raising that stock price, and what's the actual impact. The problem is if the regulators do nothing and this happens, it really puts a lot of question about the integrity of the market, right? And it really everybody's scratching their heads over this. What should happen? What is the right thing to do to control this or stop this? Not unlike what we saw on January 6th at the Capitol, right? If you don't have the police in there at the right time, things go a little crazy. And that's feels like what's happening with this. Much different, much lesser degree. It's financial harm, not personal bodily harm. But certainly that's the same kind of, platform created frenzy that people are operating under. And these are very trying times.
She just had to throw in an obligatory reference to the Capitol. I mean,
thinking is on this. They do associate the Redditor army with the Capitol protesters because both of them are populist. Both of them are bucking the system. Both of them are getting out of their place. See, the peons aren't supposed to make money. The peons aren't supposed to trade on Wall Street. And if they do, they should do it to save for their retirement because they're supposed to, make no more than $50,000 during their working career. It's supposed to be good little workers. And then if they do invest, it should be through some kind of pension fund so that way they can take care of themselves in old age. It's the fat cats on Wall Street who are supposed to be doing this. And she says these are very trying times. They were trying times for the little guy when for decades your fat cat buddies got to get away with the same stuff on Wall Street. She talks about the Redditors driving up the price of the stock. Well, what do you think Melvin Capital was doing? They drove the price down by shorting GameStop. They're the ones who initiated it. And so for decades, when she was in the SEC, she was an SEC commissioner back during the Clinton administration, I think the first couple of years of the Bush administration. Back then, this was before the internet had taken off. Reddit, I don't think even existed.
Nope.
So now that the little guy can actually join in on the fun, now that we can actually see when these hedge fund managers are shorting a company, specifically a company that we like, that we grew up with, then that's the point where we can actually fight back. And this is scaring the absolute crap out of these people.
It also further reflects just how separated they are from reality. Again, we just had trying times. They talk about this like this is trying for them. Like, losing some of our money is so trying. Yeah, how about all the business owners, the hundreds, the thousands of business owners who had their properties burned to the ground by race riots last summer? How about the decades of workers who have had their jobs gutted and sent overseas by your buddy's bad trade deals? The audacity, again, of these people, the disconnect. They think the world revolves around them.
Well, it's because for decades it did. And if you see the way that they want to clamp down on this, we see how big tech is clamping down. What they would love to do is merge big tech and big business with government in a very fascistic way. So that way they can use the Department of Justice and the FBI the same way that Twitter, basically the way that Twitter punishes its users. They really want to use the regulatory agencies, the FBI and the DOJ, to punish American citizens that way to make sure that they walk the line.
Exactly. And this is something that requires a full policy solution, right? The same way that some of the social media platforms took down the former president's Twitter account, and Facebook is having an external advisory board review the content. It could be something that requires a broader solution and approach and a real policy mandate.
So if you notice, she references Twitter, how Twitter took Trump off the platform, which that has nothing to do with GameStop. That has nothing to do with what's going on here. They're two separate issues. In fact, a lot of the Redditors probably voted for Biden. In fact, I would say most of them did. But the reason why they're linking the two is because, again, they have nothing in common. There's no connection between the two. But the reason why people like Laura Unger are making reference to this is because that's immediately where their mind goes. In fact, there was a reporter for Mother Jones who tweeted out, "I've just returned from Telegram and the Nazis are buying GameStop." So these people,
Nazis now. I guess gamers and Redditors are Nazis now.
They're Nazis now because they're bucking the system, just like Trump and his voters bucked the system, the uniparty that we've talked about. These Redditors are bucking the uniparty. We don't need market volatility in their mind, because they're afraid these people are going to crash the stock market, which kind of makes you wonder, exactly how much benefit does it have to the average American when the stock market goes up and when the stock market goes down. These people transferred. I saw the number. The number you might need to check. We might need to check this, but the number I saw just in the first day after this, like after Thursday, was $70 billion that they transferred from billionaire-owned hedge funds to these people on Reddit. People were paying off their student loan debt that the government subsidized. People were finally probably able to get out of these 40-year-olds who have been dreaming of owning a home. A lot of them are probably now able to buy a home, at least those that got out early. And this is why she's making the connection, because they're both forms of populism, and they both buck the system that the Uniparty has supported for decades. So she mentions that they need to use the same tactics that Twitter used. And this is something that the right has been warning about for the past 5-6 years. You see college campuses erupting at free speech and people who come on their campus and disagree with them. Then you see social media erupting at people who say something that goes against the grain. Eventually, what's going to happen is these people are going to move from the campus to the corporation, from the corporation to government, and their mentality is going to remain the same. So these fascists on campuses who basically want to lynch conservative speakers, they're the ones who are eventually going to be running the regulatory agencies. That's why she mentions Twitter. That's why she says we need to have something similar in regulation like Twitter does in limiting free speech. Marshall Gittler, he's the head of investment research at BD Swiss. He also referred to the Reddit populist as the financial version of the storming of the U.S. Capitol building. Sebastian Mallaby of the Washington Post wrote, he said, this is an actual headline. He said, the good guys in the GameStop story, it's the hedge funds and short sellers. He said
they love the big Wall Street guys now.
Of course. This is who runs the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is the corporate. That's why people claim they're a socialist. They're not a socialist party. They are the corporatist party today. So he writes, quote, to suggest a political analogy, they are not just blindly devoted to their candidate. They deny the legitimacy of the opposition party. They are not just acting within the system. They want to overthrow the system. Yeah, that's kind of what we're looking for. He also claimed, quote, a market without short sellers is like a political system without investigative journalists. Let me translate that for you. A market without privileged elites is like a political system without gatekeepers.
I love that he actually says investigative journalists as if that's a thing anymore. Like, there's no in the mainstream media, there's no investigative journalists.
But the
anymore.
argument is we need these quote unquote investigative journalists because they are the gatekeepers. They keep people like Donald Trump from winning elections. And he's saying in markets we need short sellers because the short sellers keep companies that the peasants like GameStop, from surviving. Keep in mind, these short sellers, Melvin Capital, they were trying to kill off, it was Melvin Capital and Citron, they were trying to kill off GameStop. That was how this whole thing started. They were short selling GameStop because GameStop, it's an old brick and mortar video game store. They figured people buy video games online. It doesn't need to exist anymore. So they were looking to make a profit by killing GameStop. And this happens over and over again. This is one of the reasons there was a town in Nebraska that actually died because a hedge fund manager decided to short the company that employed most of the people in town.
I'm old enough to remember when the Democrats were literally, like, during the Bush years, when they were against Wall Street and the big banks, and they passed Dodd-Frank and all these things. And even, not too long ago, a little something called Occupy Wall Street that the Democrats were all for. The Democratic Party mostly embraced it. This is one more reason, too, why I gotta say, in all complete honesty, because, again, we were talking off the air about this, and we said how Elizabeth Warren gave a lot of lip service to the Occupy mindset, but she, at the end of the day, also answers to her corporate masters, like most of the others in the Democratic Party. There's only one Democrat out of the approximately 527 who ran for president last year on the Democrat side who actually meant it when he said he would take on the corporations and that Wall Street hated him because he knew he would take them on. And that was Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
And again, I know...
That's why they killed his candidacy.
Exactly.
They had to kill that candidacy.
And I've said, as bad as Bernie is, if you had to choose between does he lose to Biden or does he lose to Bernie, I'd rather have him lose to Bernie than Biden, honestly.
Yeah, because if someone asked Bernie's spokesperson what they're going to do about this, they would have been very unequivocal in the fact that they're not just going to monitor the situation. They'll be like, we're going to go after the hedge fund managers. We're going to help the Redditors crush the hedge fund managers. So get this, Melvin's Gabe Plotkin, he's the owner of Melvin. He was expanding his $44 million Miami home when all this went down. So he was in the process of, he was going to tear down part of his home and build a tennis court. His home, he owns 2 homes. This one home, just this one, costs $44 million.
I've already got my underground garage. I've got my hot tub on the roof. I need a tennis court.
He picked a bad time to expand. GameStop founder Gary Kusin, I guess that's how you pronounce his name. They interviewed him about it. Someone interviewed him about it. And he said, I just grabbed some popcorn. So I can just imagine he's loving it. He's absolutely loving it.
Yes. This is literally the meme of gamers rise up right here. I love it.
But the most disturbing aspect about this, beyond the fact that Robinhood shut down trading, and it was TD Ameritrade and a few others also shut down trading, is the fact that social media and Google and Apple all jumped on the side of the hedge fund managers. They all jumped on the side of Robinhood. So Robinhood stops trading. They immediately get negative reviews out the wazoo. Their rating goes down to 1 star immediately. Apple and Google. Google and Apple both delete 100,000 comments. They may delete 100,000 reviews to keep their rating at 4 and 5 stars. And another thing, Discord eliminated the Wall Street Bets chat on their platform because they claimed hate speech, which is very, very convenient. Just while all this is going on, they just happened to decide that someone went over the line. This was the final straw. Right in the middle of this, they decided to delete the chat.
For hate speech.
Right. Facebook deleted it.
The pantheon of all the groups of people throughout history who have been truly oppressed. The Jewish people, you got the Irish, Wall Street hedge fund managers.
Yeah, too much hate speech at these Wall Street hedge fund managers. Facebook gets rid of the chat. And this isn't the first time Facebook has done this. There was a conservative group that created a group on Facebook to basically just give financial advice, to help conservatives with financial advice, and Facebook killed the group. And there becomes a pattern that develops then whenever you look at this. You got social media companies, you got Google, you got big tech, all colluding with the hedge fund managers. And a lot of these hedge fund managers, Steve Cohen, who owns one of the hedge funds that bailed out Melvin, he owns the New York Mets. So a lot of these hedge fund managers, they own sports teams. There are corporations that depend on them for capital. So that's why whenever you see these corporations and these sports teams put out Black Lives Matter propaganda, it's all the same. They're all on the same page. They all receive talking points from the same masters. And people attack the sports teams. They attack the corporations for their support for Black Lives Matter and other anti-American causes. The root of it is the hedge fund managers. Forget the sports teams, forget the corporations. If you take out the hedge fund managers and you cripple them, you take their billions and you redistribute their billions to the people, whether it's through this or whether through government redistribution, you're not going to have all this leftist anti-American propaganda coming down the pike because it starts at the top and it filters down. The hedge fund managers, and when you think about it, if I owned a hedge fund and one of my competitors is getting crushed by these Redditors, I'm going to sit back. In fact, I'm probably going to encourage the Redditors because I want this hedge fund put out of business. That's capitalism. I'm not going to bail them out. Why are these hedge funds bailing each other out? And whenever you think about it, it's because they are a part. It's like they have their own little party going and the rest of us aren't invited to it.
It's just like with the Democrat and Republican parties prior to Trump. we're led to believe there's this false dichotomy of, oh, they're two completely different. They're rivals. One is different from the other. No, at the end of the day, they're the same thing. It's like the financial uniparty of Wall Street.
Right. They're the same. That's the best way to describe it. The financial uniparty. And, they don't want their hedge fund competitors going down because it could be them next. But beyond that, they share the same ideology, and it is the ideology that society should be governed by financial and political elites. We should have gatekeepers who are the investigative journalists, and then underneath them, you've got the peasants who work for wages. And you can't start a business if you don't adhere to the ideology. You can't. This is literal. This is the definition of fascism. When you've got corporate entities who create cartels and collude with one another to keep common people from rising above. And again, this isn't capitalism. This is why when people graduate college, they look at this. They've been brainwashed to believe that capitalism is bad. They look at this system and they look at their student loan debt.
It's a self-fulfilling cycle. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy when they see stuff like this and they're like, well, yeah, screw capitalism. Because, if this is capitalism
got me to where I am now.
Right.
Student loan debt.
If this is capitalism where a few elite control things, they bail each other out whenever we finally start making gains. And then where we're trying to make gains, we get shut out. Our Discord chats get shut down because of so-called hate speech. We get kicked off we can't trade on Robinhood. We can only sell to the billionaires. Then, I can understand why people would hate capitalism after seeing this. And what's very, very interesting, you're starting to see article after article after article say with the headline, Redditors are now jumping on silver. Redditors are now jumping on this. So you're seeing article after article pop out of them. What this is coming out of the Wall Street Journal and major financial blogs. Well, I say blogs, but major financial news sources claiming that the Redditors are jumping on something new. And it's pretty obvious what they're trying to do. They're trying to diffuse the energy away from these nostalgic, like early 2000s, late 90s companies. So the people who are getting short squeezed, they can finally get their money back. It's not, even if there is no financial tie between these articles of, Yahoo Finance and Wall Street Journal, they support the same system. And even people on the right, whenever, instead of being happy about what's going on or even recognizing what's going on, they're indifferent or they don't, or they're even critical. What was interesting is Thursday, I was expecting, Breitbart, which is the populist, it's supposed to be the populist right-wing news source that everyone goes to for populist news. I was expecting, how their headlines are. They'll take up an entire web page. If there's a big story, the headline will literally cover the entire web page. I was expecting something like this on Breitbart. So I go to Breitbart. They weren't even covering it. They didn't have a single story on it. Instead, they're talking about Nancy Pelosi being mean to Republicans. And finally, the next day, on Friday, they finally run the transcript of Tucker Carlson whenever he blasted the hedge fund managers, and they release the transcript with no comment on it. So, I don't know what's going on there. I think somebody at Breitbart probably pitched the story, and it's possible that one of the editors shot it down thinking that it wasn't really that important. But this is, and even on Steve Bannon's show. So Steve Bannon had Dan David on his show. Let's play that clip.
Okay, I got to go to. We got Dan David. Dan David is known as the smartest short when it comes to China. This guy's legendary about these phony Chinese companies and shorting them, making a lot of money for people that back him, but also exposing the corruption of American capital markets. We're kind of jammed in here, Dan, and I apologize, but this thing is caught on, particularly in the populist side of these young fighters or these young investors, I guess, against Wall Street's titans. Just explain to us what's going on in the great short of GameStop.
Well, you're asking me about GameStop, but really the greater picture here is this is about our failed monetary policy here in the United States that has been abysmal for decades, and the chickens have come home to roost. I don't feel bad for the shorts at all. These are savvy investors that should know what they're doing, and if they're getting crushed, good. That happens. But what we're seeing here with GameStop, look, something going up 1,700% in a week that has no fundamental change in their business is really not a good thing. It's a bubble. It's indicative of a bubble. And the Reddit army for, you can root for them as the underdog. That's great. But it really is kind of an army led through ignorance. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean that factually. If you're not looking at fundamentals, then you're buying and gambling through ignorance.
Okay, hang on. But Dan, I love you like a brother, but no offense. All of Wall Street's turned into a casino. You can't pick on the Reddit army of being speculative when they've juiced this thing with Fed policy, right? The whole reason you got this speculative bubble is that Wall Street and the hedge funds have made out like bandits. None of these companies, when you go back to Graham's fundamental analysis, the great book on fundamental investing, that got thrown out years ago. Wall Street's turned into a casino. So how do you blame the poor guys at Reddit?
Because I know that the institutional investors will, in the end, fare better. It's a rigged game. And I feel bad for the Reddit investors, right? I mean, it's a good day today. It's a good day last week.
Melvin Capital, Dan, my brother, Melvin Capital just lost $3.5 billion. They had to get bailed out by Citadel.
Even if he doesn't have any personal vested interest, it's kind of the libertarian argument that anytime we have a financial downturn, the libertarians' immediate knee-jerk reaction is to talk about how terrible our monetary policy is, how terrible the debt is, and all this stuff like that. And like he says, well, you asked me about GameStop, but I first want to talk about our monetary policy and how the Fed has been juicing this monster for so many years, and this is why we're in this situation. Okay, good. From an academic standpoint, it's good to know about that stuff, but the people who are alive today, we're not going to change the government overnight. We're not going to educate. How are you going to educate 200 million people on this stuff? We have to live in the here and now. And in the here and now, we live in a world where hedge fund managers, short companies, make a quick buck off of doing nothing but speculative gambling on Wall Street. So look, we got student debt. We got student loans to pay off. Let's go ahead and join the game. We can't sit back and say, well, I'm not going to join the game because, it's a rigged system and the Fed has done this or that. We got a poor monetary policy.
And by the way, that's pension fund. That is pension fund money. Every guy out there working a lathe in some factory that your money's controlled by Melvin, you got a $3.5 billion gap in your pension fund, correct, sir?
But those people running that fund will be fine. And the Reddit individuals that end up losing in the end will not be fine. They are my neighbors. They are my friends. They are my family. I would like this to be a more educated place.
Yeah.
Nobody's putting money in.
Sure, Dan. They're your neighbors and friends that you just called ignorant.
Well, I'll guarantee you none of these people that are engaged in this and the Reddit buying live within 10 minutes of this guy, at least 10 miles of this guy. I mean, okay. So these people, they're your neighbors. So you live next door to people who make $20,000 a year. Come on. And whenever in fact, Bannon, I've never heard of this guy before, but Bannon introduced him as a guy who's basically a master at short selling. So I'm guessing he's got about seven figures, if not eight or 10, in his net worth. But my larger point is the fact that this was all over every major, on Fox News, MSNBC, CNN. You kept seeing these elites over and over and over again, basically telling the Redditors, it's for your own good. You really need to stop doing this. This isn't as if they're children. This is really for your own good. You really need to become more educated when it comes to stock trading. You don't need to lose this money. They don't get it. The people who are losing money on Reddit do not care. They're trying to make the hedge fund billionaires go down. Yeah, we're going to lose $200, $400, $500 if we hold on to this stock. We might even lose $1,000. They don't care. These hedge fund managers were part of the Leviathan that tanked the economy in 2008, that caused so many millions of millennials to have a really screwed up 20s and 30s. You think about all of the kids that would have been born in the 20-teens if they hadn't tanked the economy. But now millennials can't afford to get married. They can't afford to have kids because they're working 2-3 jobs to pay off the student loan debt to just claw their way back up. And because their parents got laid off, they lost their jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not, they know exactly what they're doing. They don't need to be lectured to. And this isn't, in many ways, this is about revenge. But I'll tell you what, it's fun to watch. It's very interesting to find out who falls where. You got AOC tweeting out in support of him, and then Ted Cruz jumps on the bandwagon, which, by the way, I really wish he hadn't done, because it really does show weakness when he's basically saying, yeah, I agree with her.
Letting her lead the conversation.
Yeah, you don't need to do that. That's really, because then she immediately shot back and
you tried to have me murdered 3 weeks ago.
So that's
hysterical child anthem.
This is what Ted Cruz does. Like, he did this another bill. Like he said, oh, well, AOC, if you'll introduce this bill in the House, I'll introduce it in the Senate. We can agree. It's kind of his, way to try to bring left and right together. First of all, Ted Cruz, I don't think he should be on Twitter at all, to begin with, to be honest with you.
I mean,
don't think any Republican should be on Twitter.
The last thing the Zodiac Killer should be doing is being on Twitter.
Right. And the second last thing he should be doing is retweeting a sophomore congresswoman who is like 15 years younger than him. So this is really a disgustingly weak moment. The Republicans should be leading the charge against this, not retweeting AOC.
If Trump were still in the White House, you guarantee they would be. Or at least he would be directing them to.
Oh, absolutely.
If Trump was still on Twitter, he would be supporting everything that's happening right now.
Absolutely. Instead of, but yeah, left and right are on the same page, but unfortunately you've got people on the right who are trying to virtue signal about showing the lefties, hey, look, I'm on your side, instead of saying, hey, this is the conservative position. You need to come over to our side. That's what he should have been doing.
But yeah, real quick, going back to the millennials thing and tying it back to something Steve Bannon said, I think one of the greatest political debates of our time and probably in all of history was the debate that Bannon had in November of 2018 with David Frum, a prominent never-Trumper, neocon Republican. He worked for Bush, is currently a writer for The Atlantic. And he said, earlier in the debate, he said, millennials, that a huge part of this populist revolution is how bad millennials have it right now. Because, he said, millennials today are the 21st century equivalent of 18th century Russian serfs. They're obviously better clothed.
Yep.
They have better hygiene. They're not as living in total squalor, in fear of diseases or anything, or invading armies. But they own just as much property, which is not a lot. They have just as much wealth, and they are coming of age in a workforce where they will not be able to break in. Whether it's, they're wasting time with these useless social studies degrees that don't get them jobs, they're crushed with student loan debt, whatever. They are in a horrible financial shape, by and large, as a generation, a worse off generation than most past generations. And that is going to be the fuel. He said this back in 2018, in November 2018. That is going to be the fuel of the next generation of this populist uprising. And we are more than happy to cover it and watch it come to fruition and come into play now in the form of this GameStop rebellion. So until next time, guys, this has been episode number 6 of The Right Take, and we'll catch you next week.